For 22 years, a factory dumped broken wooden pallets behind a widow's field because everyone assumed the land was worthless. The only person who kept track of every load was her 15-year-old son, and what he discovered would eventually build a hotel empire nobody saw coming. What was hidden in those mountains of discarded wood that everyone else ignored? Only thing that boys inheriting is a cleanup bill. The joke landed easily. Laughter rolled across the diner. Coffee cups rattled against saucers. A few men shook their heads and smiled into their eggs. The speaker was Vernon Pike, one of the county's most respected businessmen. A man whose opinion carried weight in every room he entered. 15 years old and running a property, he said. Might as well hand the deed to a scarecrow. More laughter. Nobody defended the boy. Nobody even looked uncomfortable. The county had already decided what Elijah Harper was. A black kid with dead dreams and inherited problems. The conversation moved on. The laughter lingered. Miles away, Elijah knew nothing about it. He was already working. The morning was cold enough to sting his ears. Mist hung over the back field. The factory sat beyond the tree line, hidden behind chain-link fences and concrete walls. Another truck had arrived before sunrise. Another stack of broken pallets sat near the property line. Elijah stood beside them, silent, observing. His father's old canvas hat sat low on his forehead. The brim was faded. The sweatband was worn thin. His father had worn it for years. Now Elijah did. He crouched beside the newest pile, pressed his palm against damp wood, waited, felt. The boards were colder than the ground beneath them. The moisture felt different. Wrong somehow. Not dangerous. Not obvious. Just wrong. The kind of wrong you noticed only after paying attention longer than everyone else. Elijah pulled a worn notebook from his back pocket. The cover was soft from years of handling. The pages were swollen from humidity. He flipped to a fresh page. March 14th. Truck number 27. Delivery time, 5:43 a.m. Stack height, 11 feet. Estimated pallets, 247. Ground condition, damp. Wood decomposition rate appears faster in southeast corner. He underlined the last sentence. Then he put the notebook away. 5 minutes later he pulled it back out. Added another note. Then another. Then another. The notebook never stayed in his pocket for long. It was where questions lived until answers arrived. The field stretched behind him. Acres of pallets. Some fresh, some rotting, some nearly absorbed back into the earth. For 22 years, the factory had dumped unwanted pallets there. The arrangement started before Elijah was born. Nobody remembered exactly how. Nobody questioned it. The factory got rid of waste. The Harper family got stuck with it. That was simply how things worked. Or so everyone thought. Elijah wasn't sure anymore, because the numbers didn't make sense. He had spent nearly a year documenting deliveries, counting, measuring, tracking. The factory dumped more wood every year than anyone removed. Yet the piles weren't growing the way they should. Something was happening beneath the surface. Something nobody had noticed, or cared to notice. His father would have cared. The thought came naturally, almost every day, sometimes every hour. 2 years had passed since the funeral. 2 years since a heart attack left his mother alone with bills and land and decisions nobody wanted. The county respected Elijah's father. That was the strange part. Men who had shaken his father's hand now spoke about selling the property, as if his family had already lost it. Respect, Elijah was learning, wasn't always inherited. He remembered standing beside his father years earlier. The memory came sharp and clear. Summer heat, dusty boots, his father's hand resting on his shoulder. What tree is that? Elijah had shrugged. His father smiled. Then learn it. The boy pointed. Why? His father looked genuinely surprised by the question. A man who can't name what's growing on his own land has no business owning it. Not harsh, not angry, just true. Then his father spent 20 minutes teaching him the difference between two trees most people thought looked identical. Not because the lesson mattered, because observation mattered, attention mattered, seeing mattered. His father never talked down to him. And somewhere beneath 22 years of discarded pallets, buried under assumptions and neglect and laughter, something waited to be understood. Before Elijah mailed it and tried not to expect anything. A busy professor had no reason to answer a teenager. Still, every afternoon he checked the mailbox. Every single day. 1 week passed. Then 2. Then 3. The county continued laughing. The factory continued dumping pallets. The mailbox stayed empty. Until one Thursday, a white envelope waited inside. University letterhead. His name written across the front. Elijah stood there staring at it. Afraid to open it. Afraid it would say he was wrong. Afraid it would confirm everything the county believed. By the time he reached the kitchen, his hands were shaking. He opened the envelope. Read the first paragraph. Then sat down. Read it again. Then a third time. Dr. Whitfield did not think he was crazy. The professor believed his observations. More than that, the professor believed they were important. According to the letter, 22 years of decomposing pallets had created something most people never noticed. Engineered organic soil. An enormous biological system. The decaying wood had transformed the ground itself. Microbes, fungi, nutrients, moisture retention. The field wasn't becoming poorer. It was becoming richer. Far richer. Potentially valuable. Exceptionally valuable. If managed correctly. The professor wrote, "Most people see waste. Based on your observations, I believe you may be looking at a resource." Elijah read that sentence 15 times. Resource. Not waste. Resource. For the first time, somebody with credentials saw what he saw. A week later, the telephone rang. His mother answered, then covered the receiver. "It's for you." The voice belonged to Dr. Whitfield. The conversation lasted nearly an hour. The professor asked questions nobody else had ever asked. How deep are the oldest decomposition layers? What happens after heavy rain? Does the ground stay moist longer than neighboring properties? How quickly does vegetation grow there? Elijah answered from his notebook. Page after page. Date after date. Observation after observation. Several times the professor stopped him. Not because he was wrong. Because he was impressed. "You measured all this yourself?" "Yes, sir." A pause. Then, "Most graduate students don't keep records this carefully." The words settled into Elijah's chest and stayed there. For years adults had talked around him, past him, over him. Now one was listening. Actually listening. Near the end of the call, the professor explained the opportunity. The decomposed pallets could be processed into premium landscaping material, organic mulch, soil products, commercial compost blends, products hotels, developers, and landscapers purchased by the truckload. The field wasn't holding garbage. It was holding inventory. The professor gave him contacts, guidelines, processing recommendations, business models, and one final sentence. Don't let anybody convince you your eyes are lying. Elijah never wrote that line down. He didn't need to. The next morning he borrowed an old trailer. Then another. Then another. The work began. Neighbors immediately noticed. Truckloads of decomposed pallet material started leaving the property. People slowed their vehicles, stopped along fences, asked questions. Most assumed he was finally cleaning up the mess. They couldn't imagine anything else. At Morgan's feed store, the rumors spread. Kid finally came to his senses. Took him long enough. Probably getting rid of the junk before the bank takes the place. Elijah didn't correct anyone. He bought gloves, chains, fuel, then went back to work. 3 weeks later, an established land developer visited the property. The man watched operations for 20 minutes, then laughed. "You know there's no money in rotten wood, right?" Elijah continued loading material. The developer waited, expecting an argument, an explanation, something. Instead, Elijah simply said, "We'll see." The man shook his head, walked away smiling, certain he was witnessing failure. What he didn't understand was that Elijah no longer needed the county's approval, because now he had evidence. And evidence was stronger than opinion. Every evening he updated the notebook. Material processed, weight estimates, moisture readings, potential buyers, projected revenue. The notebook had evolved. It wasn't just recording observations anymore. It was recording possibilities. His mother watched all of it quietly. The long hours, the trucks, the research, the skepticism. One night she found him calculating numbers at the kitchen table. "You know you don't have to prove anything to them." Elijah looked up, then back at the notebook. "I'm not doing it for them." "Then who?" He thought about the pallets, the maps, his father, the years of laughter, the hidden value beneath everyone's feet. Then he answered honestly, "I just need to know if I'm right." His mother smiled softly, because she understood. And outside, beneath 22 years of discarded wood, the future was already beginning to take shape. The county still saw garbage. The factory still saw waste. But Elijah saw something entirely different. And for the first time in his life, somebody qualified to know better had told him he wasn't imagining it. The first success arrived quietly. The field changed before anyone noticed. Grass grew thicker. Wildflowers appeared. Rainwater no longer pooled in muddy patches. The ground felt healthier, alive. Then money started coming. Not hotel money. Not yet. Landscapers bought processed material. Garden centers placed orders. Contractors purchased truckloads. Every sale went into Elijah's notebook. For the first time since his father died, the property wasn't losing money. It was earning it. The county noticed. People who once laughed began asking questions. A local newspaper even ran a small story about a teenager turning industrial waste into commercial products. Nobody laughed while reading it. That alone felt strange. By the second year, Elijah expanded. He repaired old equipment, added storage buildings, and signed larger contracts. The pallet piles shrank. The property looked cleaner and more valuable every season. Yet something still bothered him. Every night he returned to the notebook. The numbers didn't make sense. The pallets should have lasted longer. Much longer. One summer evening, he walked the oldest section of the property and pressed his hand into the soil. Something felt wrong. The ground underneath wasn't ordinary earth. Felt layered, compressed, as if something had been buried there long ago. That night he searched through old records, permits, maps, and his father's notebooks. At 2 in the morning he found the answer. An old sketch, half-finished, barely labeled. Most people would have ignored it. Elijah didn't. 22 years earlier, construction debris had been buried beneath portions of the field. Wood, concrete, gravel,
Fill material.
the decomposing pallets had hidden everything. The field wasn't just valuable because of the organic material. It was sitting on prime developable land. Land the county had underestimated for decades. At first, Elijah felt excitement, then dread, because hidden opportunity often hides hidden problems. The first soil tests confirmed contamination, old industrial runoff, drainage issues, environmental complications, problems that required serious money. Money Elijah didn't have. The laughter returned immediately. Told you it was too good to be true. Kid got lucky once. Now he's in over his head. Even investors walked away. Some called the project impossible. Others suggested he sell and move on. For the first time in years, Elijah considered quitting. Not because of the jokes. Because the evidence seemed against him. Maybe they were right. Maybe he had confused persistence with wisdom. One cold night he sat staring at his father's notebooks. Page after page of mistakes. Crossed out conclusions. Corrections. Failures. His father had been wrong hundreds of times. But every mistake had another attempt written underneath it. Then Elijah found a sentence scribbled in the margin of an old page. If the ground keeps surprising you, keep digging. That was all. Yet it changed everything. The next morning he went back to work. The correction took nearly 4 years. Excavation, permits, engineering studies, environmental cleanup, endless setbacks, slow, expensive progress. But eventually the land transformed. And standing at the edge of the cleared property one evening, Elijah finally understood. The pallets had never been the destination. They were the clue that forced him to look deeper than everyone else. The county thought he was building a mulch business. Even Elijah thought so. Both had been wrong. The real opportunity had been hiding underneath everything from the very beginning. And as the sun disappeared beyond the horizon, Elijah realized the biggest test wasn't behind him. It was still ahead. Because now he had valuable land. Now he had a vision. And the question was no longer whether he could find the opportunity. The question was whether he could build it. The first hotel almost didn't happen. That was the strange part. Years later, people told the story as if Elijah Harper had known exactly where he was headed. As if the hotel empire had been visible from the beginning. It hadn't. The land sat empty for nearly 2 years. Investors passed. Developers declined. Banks hesitated. The property was clean now. Valuable. Ready. But nobody saw a reason to build there. One afternoon, Elijah stood beside the highway that bordered the old pallet field. Traffic rolled past without stopping. Families, truck drivers, salesmen, construction crews, thousands every week. Most people saw cars. Elijah saw a pattern. For 3 weeks he sat there with a notebook, counting vehicles, recording times, tracking traffic flow. The same way he'd once counted pallets. The same way he'd studied soil. Eventually he realized something everyone else had missed. The county had no decent lodging nearby. Travelers passed through every day, spending money somewhere else. The demand already existed. Nobody had connected the dots. 7 years after the cleanup began, the first hotel opened. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't large. But it stayed full. Then profitable. Then impossible to ignore. A second hotel followed. Then a third. Conference facilities. Partnerships. Expansion. The county watched in disbelief. People who once predicted foreclosure now discussed occupancy rates. Men who laughed at notebook pages suddenly quoted investment numbers. The boy they had written off refused to become the man they expected. 20 years later, Elijah stood inside the lobby of his newest hotel. The smell of coffee drifted through the air. Guests checked in. Employees greeted travelers. The place buzzed with quiet success. Then the front doors opened. Vernon Pike stepped inside. Older now, gray-haired, slower. The same man whose joke had once filled the diner with laughter. The same man who called the property worthless. For a moment he simply looked around. Then he walked over. Quite a place. Elijah nodded. Thank you. Vernon reached into his pocket and pulled out a small notebook. The sight almost made Elijah smile. For years, people had mocked him for carrying one. Now Vernon carried one too. When did you know? Vernon asked. Knew what? That the pallets mattered. Elijah thought for a moment, then shook his head. I didn't. Vernon frowned. What do you mean? I never knew. I just knew something didn't make sense. Silence. Then Vernon asked the question that mattered. So what did you do? The answer came instantly. I kept looking. Vernon wrote it down. Word for word. A grown man taking notes from the boy he'd once dismissed. Before leaving, he paused. Your father would have been proud. Not because of the hotels. Not because of the money. Because he understood what had built it all. Observation. Persistence. The willingness to keep looking after everyone else stopped. Years later, Elijah still kept every notebook. Every mistake. Every wrong assumption. Every failed idea. His mother always said the notebooks were the most valuable thing on the property. Not because they showed how often he was right. Because they showed how often he was wrong. Every mistake had a correction beneath it. Every failure became part of the answer. That was the real inheritance. Not the land. Not the hotels. The habit of paying attention. The county spent one season laughing at a black boy with a notebook. It spent the next 40 years copying him. Nobody apologized. They didn't have to. The proof stood where the pallet piles once rotted. The real victory was never proving others wrong. The real victory was proving himself right in a world that had already decided he couldn't be. And somewhere, in every town, there's still a person everyone has already written off. Too young, too quiet, too different. Every so often, that's the exact person seeing the thing everyone else is too proud to notice.